Terence Crawford, the pound for pound king, has retired from the sport of boxing. I appreciate you hopping on with me. It's midnight here in Vegas, and you have a fight to cover. Dan Aziz and Craig Richards in Accra, Ghana, the home of Ike Bazooka Quarte and Azuma Nelson. You are commentating on DAZN tonight, but we had to talk about Crawford retiring. I just want to give a quick spiel. I'm going to personalize this talk about his retirement because there's going to be a lot of overlap on all these different boxing channels about Crawford's retirement. So I think I'm going to intermix some of the personal memories I had in covering one of the greatest fighters I've had a chance to cover and one of the greatest fighters I will ever cover in Terence Crawford. So this for me is about giving an all-time great his props. Obviously, I'm going to bounce off of whatever you cook on too, but I do want to share with the audience a number of personal memories I have covering Crawford in his prime over the years. To quote my man Brendan Taylor to get us started from True School Sports, Brendan said Terence Crawford completed boxing. And I think that's a pretty high compliment and a very accurate one. He completed the assignment of boxing, did everything a fighter could basically do and accomplish. And I think along with Andre Ward himself, Lennox Lewis, Joe Calzaghe, and to a similar extent, except his career ended on a loss, Marvelous Marvin Hagler. Terence Crawford retired on his own terms, just like the other fighters I mentioned, and kind of sets the blueprint for achieving the most meaningful things you can achieve in this sport, along with the guys I mentioned, and giving us what we wanted, the most meaningful fights. Every fighter has a fight or two you wish they did have, but walking away with all his health. And then quickly, I just want to start with the first thing that came to mind. I said, okay, when he announced his retirement today, I asked myself, what's the first thing that comes to mind about Terence Crawford? And it was watching a fight with my late father, who you met, Victor Zittel, and my pops, knew boxing really well because he watched it in its greatest eras, growing up in New York. And me and my dad didn't always get to spend a lot of time growing up, but later in life, we were able to watch a lot of fights together. And my dad knew what he was looking at. And we were watching him dominate Felix Diaz on HBO. And I said, Dad, he doesn't he remind you of the black and white days? Doesn't he remind you of the great black fighters from the black and white days like Sugar Ray Robinson? And it was the little things. It wasn't just the counter punching and being the great boxer puncher he was. Malik Scott talks about this a lot, Raheem, the keeping a guy off balance by keeping you on the end of the thing and turning him where you want. And then some of the things he would do out of the clinch and controlling his positioning, and it was those little things that made me even remember of the great fighters from the black and white days. And it was around that time I thought, because there was a debate around this time, and I'm going to share a receipt from True School Sports an interview I did in 2017, where I said this is the best fighter in the world. And the argument at the time was Vasyl Lomachenko, Andre Ward, who was about to beat Kovalev in a rematch, and Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez, who was undefeated at the time, and Terrence. And I thought, he's the best right there. So that was the first thing that came to mind. And there's a number of things I'm going to get to in the video, but what were your first thoughts? What do you think first off, Raheem?
Well, first of all, shout out to Papa Chappelle. I mean, Papa
Papa Zittel.
Zittel.
Yeah.
Zittel. You know what's funny? The reason I made that uh, name swap was because at the time, I was working a lot with Dave Chappelle
Hmm.
and staying at your house on your couch when I would come to Vegas to save a little money on covering fights. I mean, these are the hard scrabble days where I'm hitching rides from LA to Vegas, getting on Craigslist to find people who are riding back and forth for the weekend and giving them 20, 30 bucks to hitch a ride each way. Sean giving up his couch. Pops is in the living room, house full of dogs. Lovely Samantha putting up with all this shit so she can make Sean the man he is today. And the environment really, it's funny, you don't think of it at the time. Like we're going sometimes to the track and run when you felt like getting in shape, and I'd go to the boxing gym with, it was that also was like our gym as journalists, if you will. We're all paying the dues. You hadn't gone to journalism school yet. Like we're figuring out our path in this thing in a sport that really has no beaten path. There's no collegiate road to this. Even if you do go to journalism school, there's no guarantee the boxing community will accept you. There is no mentors necessarily to guide you. And we're transitioning out of the days of the old boxing writers with the fedoras and the cigar and the typewriter to modern day digital reporting. And of course, I must always say the pioneer of this genre of boxing reporting is myself getting my camera out at Wildcard. We know the story, but now it's evolving. Now the internet's getting bigger. YouTube is bigger. There's more sites coming, and we're all trying to figure out our way in that road. And your pops, man, just had that New York Scrabble, hard Scrabble energy. No frills, no thrills. Just a really good guy to be around. It's always good for young men to be around an OG, a man who's been through it all. He had the battle wounds and scars to prove it. And when I look back on that time, that was a proving ground for all of us. And so, yeah, man, just rest in peace. Really appreciate what that guy contributed to my growth and that environment. That said, you're talking about Terence Crawford, and he's shaping of his amateur career, his young fledgling as a pro, and what you might see, and the ambition that he had, and where he might land on the landscape. And if I recall, he wasn't the guy that people were really hot on. Now, if you know what you're looking at, you can say, man, that kid is talented. Who knows where he might go? Be interesting to see what the matchups look like going forward, how he progresses. But he wasn't, don't be fooled. He wasn't one of these golden horse guys. He wasn't one of these guys that everybody was talking about, oh, he's the next this, he's the next that. He came up kind of always having to prove that he was something special or more special than his class, always having to define himself. And because, as we've talked about previously, he never really was the showman of sorts in the big personality. He wasn't a mad shit talker. He wasn't out there flashing jewelry or doing anything that gets you attention as a young man and is expected as a black American fighter. He really was just going to work and doing his thing. And if you know what special looks like, then you know that is special. But he had to prove that he was worth more than the guys around him who might have been doing all that other stuff. I just wanted to set that stage from my perspective on that part of the career. Go on, man.
No, just to add to your point, Adrian Broner was getting more spotlight at the time. Errol Spence was getting more spotlight at the time. So, yeah, you're right. Even though he was high up on the pound for pound list, as high as 2 or 3 at the time, there were guys getting a little bit more shine, to your point. Yeah.
hmm Yeah, yeah. You know what it is. You know what it feels like when there's the young guys coming through and the people that everybody's really thinking are going to be stars. There's always good quality boxers. There's always guys up in the top five that people say, oh, we can see talent here, but they're not hitching their wagon to that horse because they think maybe he's not going to be the big money making star. I would say that's where Terence Crawford was. Um, with that said, if you know what you're looking at in boxing, you knew to be watching that guy.
Well, I mentioned what first came to mind once he retired, and again, in that video, I'll quickly share or just a quick receipt of me talking about him in 2017. I was stoned and a little overweight at the time, but even then could see that he was the best fighter in the world. But the first memory I have of Terence Crawford, you were there in March of 2013 at the Mandalay Bay Arena Convention Center. And Brandon Rios versus Mike Alvarado was the rematch, was the headliner that night. And Terence Crawford was in as a late replacement for Breedis Prescott. And he wound up dazzling him. It might have been 12 rounds, but I think it might have been 10 rounds where he dominated Breedis Prescott. And that was his HBO debut. And I got to interview him after that fight. And I believe you did too. And it was funny because he was just as non-committal to loving an interview then, as a non-world champion as he became as a superstar. So it's not like that's something Bud became, oh, because he got some titles and now he's harder to get an interview. No, he never really liked doing them. But what I remember is I had a friend at the time, you might remember Skylar Berman, and
Yep.
my other homies at the time, and they're watching the fight at my house, waiting for us to come back home. And they're texting me and they're going, dude, this guy is the next Pernell Whitaker because he was fighting southpaw against and he was starting at lightweight like Pernell did. And that was the big comparison they were doing at first. But do you remember that night too, in March of 2013 in Mandalay Bay? I know you were there with me.
Yeah, I do remember that night, and because of who you are and because of who I am, we have vastly different memories of that night. My night was focused on Rios Alvarado because the first Rios Alvarado fight in Los Angeles at StubHub is still to this day one of my favorite fights I've ever seen live. It was my Gotti Ward, if you will. It was one of those fights that was all action the whole time, bell to bell. And while some technique and boxing might have gone out the window in the first 30 seconds, the entertainment value was crazy. And the StubHub will always be hallowed ground for massive warriors. Like these, just something about the place made guys fight like their lives really did depend on it. And so I was so excited for the rematch, but we were all, if you remember, a little worried about Alvarado's commitment to the sport at that point, whether or not he was going to deliver. Of course, it did not deliver like the first fight. We don't even talk about the
No, no, you
so-called
think
third
of the
fight.
third fight? Yeah,
I'm saying,
yeah, yeah. He won the
I'm
rematch.
saying
Remember?
I know. I'm saying
Yeah,
the
yeah,
rematch
yeah.
didn't deliver like the first fight,
Right.
which is hard to match. But then, like I said, the third fight is even worth mentioning. Like, but we were already like, how can this thing deliver? But anyway, that is my more prominent memory of the night. And to your point, a Terence Crawford who goes 10, dominates. Sure, again, a guy you know to watch. But me, I'm always more focused on the bigger story. The bigger story. I'm keeping an eye on the guys coming up. I'm listening to Sean because he's keeping an eye on everybody, which is why you're always the best guy for me to talk to at all times. And so, yeah, I don't remember interviewing Terence Crawford, and I'm sure I did because he was, at the on the top of the main card. But that's the difference between you and I. For me, I was just like, oh, okay, well done, good job. Let me do a interview with this guy because he's in the main card and had a dominant performance. But my focus is, always on the bigger star on the night, and the higher up on the card you go, and the more significant the fight is, the more invested I am in that interview. That's the thing. If Terence Crawford at that time probably had the shine of a Broner or the talk of a Spence, maybe I would have remembered that interview. You know what I'm saying? And maybe if he had been more charismatic, and I don't remember the interview, maybe he was Denzel in that one, and I just don't remember, but probably not, right? If he had been more charismatic or had more to say or had dropped a great quote, maybe I'd remember that interview, but that wasn't his game. He went in there to do his job better than anybody else, to dominate and go back to the locker room and then go back to Omaha and live his life on Terence Crawford's terms. But that just made guys like me take longer to talk about and remember interactions with guys like him.
Yeah, he'd go on to win the ring title next year against Ricky Burns in 2014. Just to
That I
show,
remember. You see what I mean?
yeah,
Now he's winning the world title. He's at the top of the cards. Ricky Burns. I remember that vividly. That's really when Crawford got on my radar.
that was my
Sorry.
question for you. When was the first time you did see, you can recall then when you thought, okay, this dude's really fucking good?
Yeah, no, it's Ricky Burns. It's Ricky Burns. And, the more global attention on that fight made a difference. I always did have my eye over the pond. The people that made me look at where the future might be going. I know always I've had the benefit of travel, so at a very young age, so I knew boxing was a global sport. And at that time, it was still very compartmentalized. No matter where you were in the world, you needed to come to America to prove yourself. You need to be on American TV. The internet wasn't making superstars yet. You weren't able to watch on all these apps. So it was HBO, Showtime. You had to be in the American market to really be a star, no matter where you're from. And but if you start to pay attention to the best fighters from around the world, and the internet getting smaller, as I was functionally a part of creating that atmosphere, I was like, okay, there's gonna be now some international challenges, and we need to widen our scope to who's special. And Ricky Burns, don't listen. Now his name, may not be on the top of everybody's mind, even those in boxing. But Ricky Burns at the time, massive challenge. This guy was another one people were expecting to do great things. And that fight, a lot of people were picking Burns. So don't forget that was a hard challenge that was presented. And no matter how Crawford dominated or made it look, it was a really difficult fighter before the fight when you think about what the matchup was to pick for some people. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
I remember that being his proving ground and one of those moments where, like, oh, that really wasn't tough. That really wasn't difficult. As much as, talk was about Ricky Burns, this guy, this guy's got it, you
Well,
know?
well, Terrence won't let us forget about Ricky Burns in the lead up to the Canelo fight. Canelo's like, I beat Cotto and I beat, Kovalev and Triple G, and he's like, I raised you a Ricky Burns. And when everyone tried to scoff, he was like, dude, Ricky Burns is a three-division champion. And I look, and I'm a boxing nerd, and I had to look that up. Say, God damn, he was a three-division champion. So
That's what I mean. Exactly. Exactly. People forget. And I'll tell you something else, Sean, and I was going to save this for later, but since we're in this moment, this is what occurred to me while I'm thinking about and reflecting on Crawford's career and his opponents and exactly stuff like that. The big fights, and people may not remember them as big fights, but the big fights and the fighters, Gamboa, Burns, Postal,
hmm
you know,
we had a lot of talk about that fight.
right?
hmm
Right through to Porter to obviously Canelo in the end, but Spence in between. Like after Crawford, where did those fighters' careers go?
Yeah.
He's a ender. Not that everybody retired after the bell, but in a way, I'm asking now because I was racking my brain like every fighter that you remember him fighting on a big show, and it's certainly the ones that are on smaller shows you don't even remember, faded fast after that. It
hmm
was like they were done. Not they may have had more fights, but that was essentially the point where they went off the cliff, kind of into the abyss. And I know it's crazy to think of Canelo that way, but I don't know where Canelo goes from here. I don't know what happens next, but I could potentially see Terence Crawford being Canelo Alvarez's last super fight. Last super fight. And if he is diminishing, and if he is just aging as fighters do, and doesn't get this rematch, which according
Oh,
to
audio.
what we're reporting today, won't happen. Where'd I lose you?
Okay, go ahead. And if he does get this rematch, sorry, because you cut out for just a moment there. Now you're good.
If he doesn't, Canelo get this rematch, which based on what we're reporting today, isn't going to happen. He just may be at the beginning of the fast fade, where there's some more fights in the chamber for him, maybe, but they don't matter. Really, nobody is super excited about them. They're not massive fights, and we watch him diminish and diminish and diminish until he announces his retirement of a Hall of Fame career. All I'm saying is look back and see that Terence Crawford is really a finisher of guys. I I can't think of a guy who had a pinnacle or peak moment or even really a super relevant moment after being beaten by Terence Crawford.
Yeah, he may have turned Canelo into food for Hamza Shiraz. We'll see. That remains to be seen. Uh,
I mean, even Shiraz, that fight ain't happening. Not now. It's gonna be Shiraz and Billy,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like
should
that's
be.
what I'm
Yeah,
saying. Like all of a sudden, I don't know where Canelo is going, and there's not any place really that I see him headed that I'm super excited about or that would qualify as a super fight. We'll see. Of course, we'll see. All I'm saying is let's take it before Canelo because we don't know what's going to happen there. But everything else is played out. Who's done anything really after being beaten by Terence Crawford? Nobody. And those are some massive stars, some big names.
yeah. And to keep perspective, guys like Porter and Brook were on their last leg of their career, it turns out. But guys like Victor Postal, Yorioka Gamboa, and a few others. Well, Errol Spence, we could talk about the accident now, but he was still he was the undefeated number one welterweight when Crawford beat him, and so yeah, yeah, some guys you could argue were at the end, but other guys were undefeated, and so yeah, it's a fair point.
I'm just saying, some guys or other guys, all the guys
Yeah,
were done.
yeah. Well,
After that fight, they were done.
let's talk about the first undefeated guy that was done so I can continue to be like Minnie Riperton and take us down memory lane. Shout out to Bill Haney. Shout out to Bill Haney who gave him the Canelo idea. So, um, going back to Gamboa, which, yeah, Ricky Burns is his first title win, but Gamboa is his first star-making performance. And Gamboa was small at the weight, but was the cyclone of Guantanamo and was a pound for pound incredible talent. Yeah, had his flaws, would start fights hot and then taper off a little bit. But at featherweight in 130 and coming up to 35 was a mesmerizing talent. I mean, was one of the most purely gifted fighters in boxing and was undefeated by the time he fought Crawford. Hurt Crawford a few times with right hands early in that fight. And then that's when I realized what an amazing punctuator and thus counterpuncher Terence Crawford is. It was incredible. That's when to say it again, that's when I realized he was the best punctuator in the business and the best counterpuncher in the business. And people were still trying to figure out the charisma of Terence Crawford. What is it that clicks there? The aura, as the kids call it now. And Max Kellerman wisely would highlight to us how mean he is, right? But my mom, that was the first time I showed Terrence to my mom and watching a fight. I don't know why I'm getting a thumbs up here, but
Because you said
watching
your mom, and everybody loves Sean's mom. If you don't know her, I feel bad for you.
Carla, right? Yeah. So I
I don't know
show
if you wanted me to
mom.
shout out your mom's actual name. I know you live on the dangerous side of the world
Yeah.
in this boxing and journalism game, which is why I didn't shout out either one of your parents' names.
So well, so it's all good. But my mom would watch the fights too. She'd go, I hate sports, but the only sport I like is boxing. It's one on one and it's not bullshit. And I was like, all right, so if I felt a fight was worthy, a performance was worthy enough, I'd go to my mom's house and put on the fight on HBO and see if the fighter could captivate her. So I showed her the replay of Crawford Gamboa, and my mom was the first one to be like, his family. His family is what, and she was like, he is a badass dude. She reminded him of Bernard a little bit in that executioner, serious, in the corner, no nonsense, badass kind of guy. But she was the first one to note his sisters and his mom at ringside, and that became part of the charisma, dancing with his mom in the ring. But my mother, I remember, noticed that about him immediately and gravitated towards that immediately, was his family at ringside. So yeah, and then other little things. Speaking of them, I remember being in the bubble when he knocked out Khan, or not Khan, Brook. And I was fortunate enough to be one of the very few people in that bubble during COVID time. And he knocked him out with a power jab, which is very rare. And he came out to Shaka Khan. And ain't nobody by Shaka Khan, it was like dun, 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 dun. And I was like, I was grooving ringside, and I hear his sisters behind me like, "Hey, hey, hey!" I don't think they were saying it to me, but I don't think they were referencing me, but they were just getting it. And Brooke came out of the gate and gave him problems with his jab. And I remember Terrence talking about that with him afterwards. Your fucking jab was a problem early, but then the minute he turned over a power shot in the fourth round, he knocked him out. That's a memory I have. Another memory is going down to Omaha. The only time I went to Omaha to watch him live, and I was texting you about it in the early rounds as Jose Benavidez, who left. Benavidez was a knucklehead, but like his younger brother David, a supremely talented knucklehead, and really I think is one of the what ifs of this generation, along with a lesser degree because he went on to actually become champion Jamal Charlo. But Benavidez sparred all those rounds with Pacquiao. He had length, reflexes, lots of natural talent, great hand speed, and did things to Crawford no one else would dare do, like fight with both hands down. And early on, got off to a good start in that fight, and me and you were texting about it, like, wow, like Benavidez up 2-1, maybe 3-1 after 3 or 4 rounds, and then Crawford began to systematically break him down and took advantage of that long abdomen with some incredible body shots and putting together combinations, and then knocked him out in the 12th round in a pitched battle and swung on him at the weigh-in before that. And for my video game nerds, I had a great session in the Omaha bars playing Street Fighter 3 Third Strike that weekend. But yeah, do you remember that? You remember us texting about that fight too? The Jose, and he went on to say that was one of his toughest fights.
Yeah, I do. And I also want to remind people about that Gamboa fight because, again, in a long view of history, sometimes people forget what a challenge a fight was supposed to be when it ends up not being uh, a classic, will you? But there was some controversy in that Gamboa fight around a knockdown. And while, yes, Lampley was talking about the meanness of Crawford, which I always think of as a kind of it's not a backhanded compliment, but I don't really see it as an analysis of somebody's skill. Oh, they're mean. You can say somebody's a finisher. That's different. But I never did like that characterization of whether the guy is mean or not. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? Either he can get it done or he doesn't. Either he's a finisher when a guy is hurt and he knows how to select his shots and not punch himself out and get a guy out of there, or he doesn't. It has nothing to do with being mean. However, there is something to be said about that family dynamic and coming up hard. And, again, even in his goodbye announcement, Crawford thanked his mother for the tough and hard lessons that some people might translate into where that so-called meanness comes from. But that's a conversation for another day. The Crawford Gamboa fight, I'm reminded of people being critical of him switching, being ambidextrous, if you will, having the ability to go back and forth, and whether or not Gamboa would take advantage of that, whether or not that would be a mistake with a slick fighter like Gamboa. And they were questioning Crawford all along. Every time he would do something that, technically you're not supposed to do, or would be show some kind of proficiency or a level of the sport that is uncommon, it wasn't just assumed that he was at that level or he had that ability. He had to prove at each stage, and that meanness, that finisher mentality, I thought was challenged in the Postal fight, by myself included.
I remember.
That was the fight where I was like,
I remember.
is he a finisher? You know what I mean? So, including myself, he's one of these guys who, rightly, as he said in the post fight for Canelo, people doubted along the way. Now, granted, I became a believer well before the Canelo fight, but even I, in the early stages, just part of the narrative was, and we're not sure. He's not the superstar that everybody's hitching their wagon to right out the gate, and he's doing things that he shouldn't necessarily be able to do with ease in all the way up to the Canelo fight, taking at 68, a fight he shouldn't be taking, at a weight he shouldn't be fighting at, potentially an opponent that's no good for him. All of that stuff, I can see how the attitude, even towards the media, was shaped, and you put that in concert with his personality of being a bit of an introvert, feeling like his job is in the ring and not outside of it in front of the microphones. And on top of that, feeling like he's the best, but everybody else is getting the shine and he's always being doubted. That was the formulation of what you see before you now, and the tribulation that this guy went through throughout the pursuit of his career. That's how you get the Terence Crawford, the fighter, also Terence Crawford, the attitude.
So I remember what you said after post. He goes, "Yeah, is he a finisher?" Right? And he would go on to knock out everybody for 7 years straight after that
I needed an answer. He gave me an answer. That was the most excited he was to answer any question I've ever asked him. He answered that question for 7 years straight.
I will, yeah, through three different sitting presidents in office.
Yeah.
I was gonna save this stat for later in the video because I got a few stats for him, but I'll get to it now since we've arrived there. And yeah, he goes on to knock out John Molina at 140 pounds in December of 2016, and then knocks out everybody until July of 2023 against Errol Spence, right? Pretty cool statistic. Gets a KO streak for 7 years through three sitting presidents, the end of Obama, the entire first Trump term, and almost the entire term of Joe Biden. But here's another statistic that is very special about Terence Crawford. he won every single fight at welterweight by knockout, and every single one of them was a title fight because his first fight at the division was Jeff Horn for the WBO welterweight title. Horn had taken off of Pacquiao. People say controversially, but I think it's over. It wasn't a robbery. I think that was a very close fight. Pacquiao came in flat that night. Horn got off to a good start. Pacquiao almost knocked him out in the ninth round, but did not. It was in Horn's backyard. He got the benefit of the doubt, and then Terence dominated him in his first fight at welterweight. Yeah, what do you think of that stat? He knocked out every welterweight he ever faced, and they were all title fights.
It's what makes fans excited to pick him against just about anybody, but it's not a stat you hear often.
Hmm.
It's not something that people really reference. I think Sean, it might go to, while it's an unassailable stat, those fights are not, eh, understand what I'm saying.
The era.
Those fights are not classics. They're not really the ones that are etched into your memory for whatever reason. This is not me trying to diminish his accomplishments. You beat the guys in front of you. You knocked out everybody in the division that you faced. Who can criticize that? It's not a criticism. I'm just saying it's not a stat that people normally pull up. It's not something that is referenced with Terence Crawford, his knockout ratio, or that tremendous stat. When you hear it said the way you say it, that's a tremendous stat. He knocked out everybody at welterweight, but it's just not one of the things that's really etched on his, front sheet of his profile. You can determine why. I think it's just because those are not considered really classic fights that people remember, or they don't remember the knockout after knockout after knockout. And other knockout artists who maybe don't even have as impressive a stat like that are thought of as knockout artists, and people can name their knockouts back to back to back and their ratio and all of that. It's one of the things that makes Terence Crawford the fighter he is, but also the attitude he has.
Yeah, I mean, we're giving him his flowers that much deserved. And again, it's an incredible stat. And he goes on to knock out Porter and Spence to really solidify his welterweight run against two very legit guys. We didn't get the prime Keith Thurman fight. Politics got in the way of that. We didn't get the Jaron Ennis undisputed title defense. And his era at welterweight wasn't the 80s era at welterweight, and it wasn't the early 2000s, late 90s era at welterweight. But that being said, it's an incredible stat. To rewind back to what you said, it was actually Kellerman who mentioned the meanness, not because I think you said Lampley. I hear
Oh,
you.
fair.
We all look the same. I understand, but it's just,
You all sound the same. Just kidding. Everybody but Sean Zittel, boy. He says some things that nobody else is willing to say. Shout out to that editorial.
yeah, I do try to sound a little bit like Jim and Max, though. I'm not gonna lie. I studied the tape, okay? But
If you sound like them in tone, not in content, I don't see either one of them doing anything like what you're doing right now. But again, conversation for another day. You can look through the video archive. You don't have to look far to see what I'm talking about.
yes, but so again, to keep it on memory lane for a minute, because when you mentioned the Postal fight, so Lee Samuels, rest in peace, the late great Lee Samuels from Top Rank PR, he was the one, and I can spill the beans now. I mean, I think I've said it before, but he was the one who let me know Freddie was not going to give Crawford the Pacquiao fight. Now, that being said, Crawford definitely wanted the Pacquiao fight. If you know Juan Manuel Marquez and how his counterpunching gave Pacquiao all kinds of fits and what Floyd went on to do, you could definitely assume that Crawford would have been a favorite by when that fight was really being asked for in the mid 2010s. Um,
Mm.
but but what Lee let me know was based on the Postal fight, Freddie said no, we don't want that fight. Crawford's legs. He mentioned the legs in part, how much he moved on Postal, the lateral movement to go with the power and the length and all this stuff. And he just was like, nah, we're not doing that unless they overpay Manny, essentially. Unless they give him a $20 million guarantee with upside. And Crawford, he could have done more. You mentioned he's an introvert. He could have done more to try to get that fight, but instead they gave Tim Bradley a third fight. Okay, so that's official from someone who was covering these guys back at that time. And another memory I want to share is heading into the Errol Spence fight at the UFC Institute. Crawford has his media day, and I'm already picking Crawford to win by TKO or by knockout because of the counter punching. Spence is a come forward fighter who overwhelms you with volume, and I knew that would play into the hands of Crawford being the best counter puncher. He would get plenty of opportunities to do that. I'm gonna share the receipt from the LA Times, but what I remember is he's playing the Machiavelli album, and which is I'm Tupac's my favorite rapper ever, favorite artist ever. That's my favorite album from him ever, and he had been sharing on Instagram a lot of the Machiavelli album, and I knew what he was saying. He was Against All Odds is the last song on that album, and he's looking at PBC and Spence as his Haitian Jack and Jimmy Henchman and the rap game. Like he feels frozen out by them and all that. So I knew what his mindset was going into. So we go to the UFC Institute and the Machiavelli album's playing, and it's around the time Against All Odds is playing. I look at my other media members. I look at my guy who I love from PBC, Kenny Buhari. Shout out to Kenny. And I look at them and I go, "It's over. It's over." And I got like like it's over. And one memory I do like is Terrence's rapping. He's done with his workout and he's sitting on the ring apron, getting his hand wraps taken off by his team, and he's rapping "Shed So Many Tears" from Pac, right? From the Me Against the World album now. And I was able to rap a couple bars because I know all the lyrics too to "Shed So Many Tears" with him. But I just remember that and his abs coming through his shirt, which was drenched in sweat from his workout, and just being like, "God damn, this dude is about to do exactly what he did." But I didn't even know he was gonna do that. I thought we were in for a pitched battle that ultimately, in the end, he would win. And that brings me to what I would say are his top five performances. And I'd be asking you to do it off top. Maybe you could take a stab at it if you'd like. I say his top five performances are Errol Spence is number one. I know the Canelo fight was for higher stakes and on a bigger stage and bigger platform, but the Spence fight is his Hopkins Trinidad. It's his masterpiece. It's his Mayweather Corrales. And the Canelo fight's a masterpiece too because of the level of opponent and how much versatility, how he put everything together for that fight. But I would put Canelo at two. I would put Gamboa at three because that's his introduction to becoming a boxing star. I would put Horn at four because Horn, he dominated and knocked him out in his first fight at welterweight. And Horn did just beat Manny fucking Pacquiao, who went on to whoop Keith Thurman and Broner and have a renaissance after that L. And then at number five, Victor Postal, because Postal was undefeated, was tall, one of the few fighters who could challenge Bud at long range, had good feet, Ukrainian fighter with the Ukrainian school. Really never got stopped until a questionable stoppage to Gary Antoine past his prime. Yeah, so that's my top five. What do you think?
I'll give you my top five, Sean.
Okay.
Madramov, 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 Madramov. Here's why, because he spits hot fire.
Oh, no.
Listen, the reason I'm picking Madrimov as all top
Really?
five is because it's the only fight that Terence Crawford was ever actually in where after the fight he gave us some reason to doubt him.
Hmm.
It was the only fight where it was like, well, if you look like you did in that fight, in the next fight, which is a bigger challenge than this fight, you might not win that fight. The irony is, all the fights you've picked and every other one other than the one that I picked, he essentially dominated. There was no decline in your perspective or prospect on what Crawford could do or would do. And the reason I thought that the Canelo fight and the narrative worked so much better than it otherwise would have was because the Madrimov fight was somewhat close. Was because he gave us some narrative to say, well, maybe you can't do that. And that was at 54. This is at 68. Like, well, now we have something to talk about because it looks like maybe there's something Terence Crawford can't do. And without the Madrimov fight, I don't know where we get that narrative from. So the irony of Crawford's career, in a sense, is that he never really did give us any classic battles in the ring where it was close and you were nail biting, or you were like, we don't know how this is going to turn out when the goes to cards, or he was losing a fight and then he knocked the guy out to save the fight. None of that, which is maybe why we don't remember that he knocked out every welterweight. Maybe why the look back on his career isn't a highlight reel of really tough nights, or where he had to grit it out, or when he got up off the canvas to win, or a 12th round stoppage in a fight he was down 8 rounds. Like, none of that's part of his narrative. And in a way, it takes away from the star power of his legacy, because that's part of boxing normally, even for the greatest of the greats. Madrimov, for those reasons. And that is, I'll go back to the mantra, why you have Terence Crawford, the fighter that you have, the attitude that he has, and also somewhat the difficulty in placing him in history in people's minds. Because you don't have the classic narrative of the fighters that you normally get who are great, which takes us to the end of his career. And that doesn't mean we can't go back and still discuss other elements of what got us to the end. But here at the end, Sean, if this is in fact the end, it's hard to place him against Floyd Mayweather, another fighter who didn't face much difficulty, but still, Terence Crawford is going to constantly have to answer this question, at least in the annals of history, whether or not it's him or Mayweather. And I think, in his mind, without question, it's him. But it's a yet another element of his legacy that, even in the finish, will be doubted because of this other guy who had bigger star power, who made much bigger fights, who had way more classic moments that people remember, who was way more boisterous and had star power on every level that outsized what Terence Crawford was doing. But yet, with all the accolades that we talk about, the streak, the record, the way you can match up, it's still not going to be enough for most people. You're going to have certainly a class of people who Crawford all day. But I would venture to say that a vast majority of people are going to pick Floyd Mayweather over Terence Crawford as an all-time great.
Yeah, well, Floyd, they both were 5 division champions. Crawford covered more weight, 33 pounds versus 24 pounds for Floyd, 30 to 54 versus 35 to 68. Mayweather's quantity of stellar names, regardless of context of when he fought them, right, or at what time, is hard for any fighter in the history of the sport to measure up to. If you're just going by the names, if you just go to BoxRec and say, forget when he fought him and at what weight or whatever, or what momentum they had at that particular time, you go De La Hoya, Mosley, Canelo, Pacquiao, Gennaro Hernandez, Arturo Gatti, Diego Corrales, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's tough. It's gonna overwhelm the names on Crawford's resume. But like you said, there's gonna be a segment of people who are like, Crawford had even more of a freakishly long reach than Mayweather. He was a little meaner in the ring than Floyd, to go back to Max Kellerman's point. He was a little bit meaner and more of a finisher. He was the puncher in the higher weights moving forward at 47 that Floyd Mayweather was not. So he will have his group of purists that believe he would have beaten Floyd Mayweather at welterweight in particular, which is the glamour division. You know, I think most people would favor Floyd at 35 and 40. 40 would have been something. 47 would have been something. I just hate that we don't have a time machine for these kind of fights. You know, because
Yes, if we had a time machine, Sean, we would 100% use it to go back and create fantasy fights.
yeah,
Nothing else. That's what we need a time machine for
yeah.
most.
Anything else will fuck up the future and everything, right? Or the butterfly effect. But we should be able to get away with putting motherfuckers in a time machine and making them fight in their prime. That shouldn't mess with too much. Okay, I'm with you on that. Another thing that I'll remember about him is that look. It's a look the it to be to we Stallone called it the eye of the tiger. Okay, it was a look he has in those photos. Maybe I'll put him up while we're talking. When he was a little boy with the headgear falling off and his hand wraps on at 5 or 6 years old, and it was a look I remember in the Spence press conference in New York. He always had it. He didn't just have it. You know the look I'm talking about.
Mhm.
Bernard had it. Um, Larry Holmes had it. Dwight Muhammad Kawi had it. Like it's that look. Roberto Duran had it in times. It's the look a lot of great fighters have had. What could you say about that look, Raheem?
That's that 1,000 yard stare, knowing that you're going right through what's ever in front of you, that your destination is on the other side of this human being, that what you're looking at is not an obstacle, but it's a laid track. That is a scope to the future. They got a bullseye on something that is beyond you. That is that look. That is that intangible. That is that greatness. It's one of the things that you have the real privilege if you get to report in person on the sport of boxing that you can see with your naked eye. Now, because you've seen it with your naked eye, you can spot it more quickly on video or tape or television. But to see it in person, and there's an energy to it. It's not just visual. You feel it. That is something that is one of the many gifts that this profession has given me that could only be experienced in person. They look through their opponent and they look right through you. And as a journalist, your job is to look into them while they're looking through you and see what's on the inside of that incredible machine. That's the back and forth. That's the exchange. And when you get in there, boy, inside a fighter's mind is a wild place. It can be dark. It's always dangerous to some extent, and it is fascinating. No matter who you're talking to, that has the courage to get through those ropes and get in that ring, and certainly at the level that I speak to them and you speak to them, have the success that we're even talking to them at all. Inside those minds is a menagerie of complications, contradictions, and exceptional human beings. But that thing that comes out of the mind, that thing that shoots through their eyes into the future, it's something to behold.
Well, okay, so that brings me to I'm going to share, I guess, maybe not my favorite memory of Crawford, but the moment maybe I appreciate the most. I guess that's not too much of a difference. That look you're talking about. I had to deal with it a lot. He could be rude. He was not a big fan of us. We were not his favorite thing to deal with in the world, media, right? And that look he would give, sometimes it's the look similar, not quite as intense, but a similar look he would give when you'd ask him for an interview and he'd say no. There was a few times I'd ask him for an interview post fight and he'd give me that look and not even speak. He would just the look meant no. Okay?
Oh,
Okay?
okay.
But
There's
then
another look. You're talking about that look of disdain, that look of like,
no, not that. Just
oh. Yeah.
that he gave me
Well,
that a few times. Not even a no, just a head shake no, right? But
yeah.
other times he said yes, and I had very good interviews with him. But one time before we did an interview, we were at the MGM David Copperfield Theater where they'd hold those big press conferences sometimes. And again, I don't mean to milk it, but I had that seizure in that theater for Canelo Jacobs. So this must have been within 12 months of that in the same place. And I go over to Crawford, who's sitting by himself. And before, I can't remember the fight, but we're about to cover a presser. It might have been Canelo Kovalev. I can't remember. But I go over to him. And before I ask for the interview, I go, let me just catch up with him because sometimes he appreciated that. Talk to him about the Packers, talk to him about something else before you just go straight into the interview. And we were talking and he asked me how I was doing. And I told him, in this place, I had a seizure recently. He goes, "You did?" And he goes, "Well, if that happens to you again, someone's got to make sure they lay you on your side. You can't be laid right on your back. They got to lay you on your side." And then he actually knew like the medical procedure you got to do. and he told me about that. And then I got to play paintball with him with Sean, and just see different sides of him, that he could be a good dude. What struck me about him was his wisdom. He may not have been the most extroverted speaker and be super eloquent. He certainly wasn't inarticulate or came off ever as dumb or anything close to that. But that wasn't his big thing, right? But he always had this wisdom and observation, to this intelligence in his eyes, and knew a thing or two, to say the least, about life here on Earth. And that's I remember that. What would you say is? I remember one time in 2017, you were hanging out with him and Giandra and Ak and Barack in the media room. Canelo Golovkin won Supremacy, and you had a great interview with him. He wound up giving me one too, but you were all having a good time, and you guys were nice enough to let me join that and everything. But what would you say is maybe your favorite interaction with Terence Crawford?
My favorite interaction with Terence Crawford is after the Shakur Stevenson fight in New York on that ring card at the Arthur Ashe Stadium. Not even his fight. He comes out of the back room pouring down sweat as if it were his fight, towel around his neck. Obviously, the Canelo fight hasn't happened yet. His excitement for his brother, the amount of energy that he clearly expended ringside without having a fight. Not only had he not just come from his own fight, he didn't have a fight at all that night, that week. That fight that he had was well off into the distance in the future. And it was as if I was talking to someone who had just won his own first world title or something. The energy that he lifted the entire room that he had just come from and into with, I had never seen that Terence Crawford in the experience you talk about, in the many, many times I've interviewed him after his own fight, before his own fight, big press conferences, kind of small ones, casual conversations. This guy was beaming. This guy was like superstar that I had never seen. And it wasn't about his own accomplishments. It was about his teammates' accomplishment. That was a marvel to see. And to have known him for as long as I have professionally, and to experience him in interview format as many times as I did, to have a moment like I had never seen before, in an energy I had never seen emitted from him before, almost talking to a different kind of guy. Sean, there were two moments when I was sure he beats Canelo. That moment and the weigh-in
The way.
at the fight. In between there, I could go back and forth. But there were two moments when I was sure. That moment and the weigh-in. The star I saw that moment, the guy that I interviewed, and I'm so happy it's on tape. Like, it's on the interview. It's an interview. You can all see it. I believe the energy comes through the screen. When I think of Terence Crawford, that's the Terence Crawford that I'll remember, because that was the guy that I was like, oh, you have these moments, and this is going to sound wild, but I had an opportunity to speak to Al Gore at a political function after the beginning of the campaign for president, right? And one of the most affable, funny, bright, engaging guy. I talked to this guy for like 12 minutes. Al Gore, Bill Clinton's vice president,
Man Bear Pig.
who ultimately lost or was, defeated by the Supreme Court to George W. Bush. And I was like, who the fuck is this guy? Why don't you take this guy out there onto the stage and campaign for president as this guy? This guy is likable. This guy is fun. This guy is engaging. I'd vote for this guy. I'd campaign for this guy. And people would vote for him. And then you go out there like, ma, 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 ma. I was like, there's a moment I'll never forget. That was my Terence Crawford thought. Like, man, if people could see this guy, but you can, because I recorded the interview and I put it on the internet.
So
Take a look at that guy. The internet, take a look. After Shakur Stevenson wins in New York, let me tell you something. That Terence Crawford, if he had been the guy that you encountered early in as an amateur starting his career, that might have been the biggest superstar that we've seen of modern era. He might then have eclipsed the star power of a Floyd Mayweather. That's what I mean, man. And so looking at the end of his career, if this is in fact that, and I always have to qualify it because we know fighters, a happy fighter, I think I might, if there's any one thing that might convince me this might really be the end, it's how happy he was there. And the fact that in his goodbye statement, he talks about the next fight to come. I believe Terence Crawford has a love for his team, the fighters who come up in the gym with him in his stable, his trainer, his brand, the sport. However he sees the future of the sport, he wants to be involved in it. And if he sees a fight for him, maybe that's outside the ring, that helps the fighters that he feels that are his family reach their potential, reach the pinnacle of the sport. I'm not sure what fight he's talking about that's next, but I'm pretty sure it is about helping others achieve. I don't think it actually necessarily is about his own accolades or him reaching some other accomplishment for himself. I think he wants to be the guy who's a kingmaker. He wants to be the guy who is somehow fundamentally involved in changing the sport in a way that he feels like is better for everyone else. And that might be his next crowning achievement in the fight that he's willing to be in. The guy I saw there is a leader. The guy I saw there is a happy warrior who might just be happy because he knew, even if I didn't know before, doubted in between, and then knew again at the weigh-in, that guy I talked to, he probably was so happy because he knew very soon he would defeat Canelo Alvarez and he would complete boxing and that there was another fight waiting for him. And it just might be the fight for his brothers and the sport itself.
Well, yeah, you were smart enough to realize he was going to win after the weigh, and so was Leo, my son. I went down with the ship, and that was the only fight I picked against Terence Crawford was the Canelo fight. And to your point, in case people haven't listened to me the last 12, 18, 24 months, I'm very skeptical of TKO's long-term efforts given their history in the sport. But I'll pay this compliment to Terence Crawford. Boxing's a fraternity. And if and fighters have a fraternity amongst themselves, if Terrence is going to be very hands-on with their enterprise, that's good news for the fighters and makes me a little less skeptical, even though I'm very skeptical of his potential partners. Maybe he's not partnering with Dana and TKO and Nick Khan. Maybe he's going to do his own thing. I don't know what he's going to do next. Maybe that's not even what he's referencing. But if he has something to do with it, that makes me a little more optimistic about how they may be going about their business versus how they've gone about it in the past with MMA and everything. And then also what I do think is funny, and we will finish soon asking, do you really think he will stay retired? I think he will. What is funny is Turkey Al Sheikh trying to tell him no retirement in preparation. And it's like, this is Terence Crawford. He's not exactly easy to tell what to do. So he retired despite Turkey. And I know Turkey released a tweet saluting him on that with a heartbroken emoji. But I did think it was funny that he said no retirement. And Crawford said, let's go. Let's get it. Just let that big check clear in September. And yeah, I'm going to do what I want in the end. And that's very on brand for Terence Crawford. Good for him. I think he's making the right choice stepping away from the sport. So since we're there right now, yeah, do you think he will come back? I see a lot of people on Twitter thinking he will come back. I don't think so. Could be wrong, but especially if there's a lot of zeros out there and a big fight that makes a lot of sense. But he's close with Andre, for example, close with Tim Bradley. Those guys walked away and meant it once and for all. What do you think?
Well, Andres meant it
Always
then,
flirting, right?
but
Flirting,
he's
but
flirting,
yeah,
and those zeros matter.
yeah.
And I can never trust a fighter to retire. I don't care who it is. Nothing to do with Terence Crawford as an individual.
And Tim
But
wants
get
to
the
fight
fuck
Jake
out of
Paul and
here.
Jay Leon Love, right? So, you know,
I can never trust a fighter to retire. Let me tell you something. When these great long gone legends we're finally going to be able to be animated by AI, their families will give the permission and consent to go into their grave, dig them up, and take a little bit of their DNA to recreate some version of themselves to then have these super fights that we talk about wanting a time machine for. You heard it here first, Sean. One day we will have all of those fights and clones will be fighting them using the very DNA of the original fighter and the technology that we have advanced, and that will be part of the extinction of the human race. A conversation for another day.
That's not
But
good enough for
that
me. I want actual time machine, prime versus prime. I'm not going to trust the clone DNA. I'm not going to trust the AI. I want the
it's
fucking
coming.
time machine.
It's you may not, but Leo will.
Yeah, yeah.
It's coming. With that said, I cannot trust any fighter to retire. And Terence Crawford is a very, very, very smart guy. He is not in a rush, which his career has proven. He's felt most of his career that he's been frozen out, that he has been doubted unjustly, that he's been disrespected, that he had to come up tough at every stage, that he never gets the credit, all the things, all the things that every microaggression and macro aggression. Let's not forget he sued Top Rank for racism, so he has no allegiance necessarily to any stage or promoter or anything that supersedes his own self image of being the victim of something,
Daniel
right?
Kinahan, Daniel Kinahan, but we're not here for that tonight. We're giving him his flowers.
I'm saying, this is
Yeah,
not a critique. These are facts.
yeah,
These are
yeah,
not my opinion. This is what he said and what he has done.
yeah.
So that's what I'm basing on what he might do and what he might one day say, like, I'm coming back. Tyson Fury is giving people the blueprint to manipulate His Excellency when His Excellency really wants something, and you are patient enough and in a position to wait to get yourself the most favorable terms. I do believe early days when Tyson Fury would retire that he was sincere in the moment. We know Tyson Fury is bipolar by his own admission. He struggles with mental health. His home life becomes too monotonous, and no one is really looking after him as far as you go here, you train, you eat this, you get home, you sleep now, you run then. And he likes that type of regimented structure. And he likes, of course, the spotlight and being the center of attention. Who doesn't love millions and millions of dollars every few months? And I think the life of a fighter, that structure of a fighter, he did genuinely miss after he genuinely retired. I think early retirements, that was it. These late retirements, this last couple, I think are about kind of market manipulation. While some of that is still true, he understands that you are more valuable if you can say no and seemingly mean it, and then make them not only take you from a no to a yes, but a no forever to a maybe. That's a certain amount of money then. From a maybe to a let's talk. That's another level of money. To a yes, I'll do it. Now you're negotiating at 3 stages instead of just one. And Terence Crawford is never, as we've spoken about, been in a battering fight, doesn't have injuries to heal, is preserved at 38, has had these fights his own way, beat soundly a 168-pound Canelo Alvarez, got paid handsomely for it, and could benefit from a rest. Terence Crawford ain't about to get fat. Terence Crawford's not about to get lazy. Terence Crawford's not about to lose focus or leave boxing. He's just about to take a break where he may right now think this break might be forever, but I think there's a very good chance that as Jerome Ennis builds his own stardom, I don't think Janabek ever was a big fight. Now certainly is unlikely to ever be, but who knows who emerges on the stage in the next year or 2 even. A 40-year-old Terence Crawford will give us reason to finally doubt again, like a poor performance against Madrimov, or at least not a dominating performance against Madrimov, gave us a reason to talk about him. If you give us 2 years of Terence Crawford out of the ring, other stars being able to come through and shine, build their own marquee value, And now we're talking about a world champion, Jerome Ennis, who's accomplished some things that have made him a bit of a star in the absence of Terence Crawford. Terence Crawford, 40 years old, coming back. I could see that being a super fight in 2027. I could see that being the kind of money that all of a sudden gets a guy out of retirement and gives us a narrative where maybe this fight, while if it happened now, most people will have Terence Crawford as a pretty big favorite. At a 40-year-old Terence Crawford with a Jerome Ennis that's been busy for 2 years, now maybe it's 50-50. We know Terence for whatever he's going to do to support TKO and Zuffa, and he's certainly going to stay in league with Turkey. He ain't fighting in no Zuffa boxing. And there ain't no super fights for him in traditional boxing as we know it. The only big fight really right now, and it is not Jerome Ennis. It maybe is a Canelo rematch, but that rematch to me would be like Ben Eubank too. Not that the fighters are the same, but I think the energy and the anticipation and the conversation around it would drop right off a cliff, just like that fight did. Terence don't need it. Canelo needs it, and for whatever curse Canelo has, he just can't get a rematch on the same terms with any fighter who's beaten him. And that is just part of what his legacy is going to be, and by no fault of his own to that degree. And remind you, I said on the exact same terms with the fighter who's beaten him. Nobody is willing to give him that rematch. So yes, maybe Terence means it, but am I prepared to believe it and say we'll never see Terence Crawford in the ring again? No, because I can see too many roads back for a very smart fighter who might actually be better in 2 years after a rest, staying in the gym, training, and come back and best some guy who is, at that point, the marquee name.
I don't know. That ship sailed for me with Ennis. Ennis's team doesn't even really pursue it. Like when I ask Bozy about it, they feel like that ship has sailed forever. Again, I would have loved to have seen Crawford make welterweight one last time if he could have made it strong. I know he said he couldn't anymore, but he looked pretty damn good in his last fight at welterweight. I would have loved to have seen it. Never happened. It is what it is there. And also for people who are like, "Wow, you're switching up," and then well, yeah, of course there was some things about Terrence the last two fights of his career and then eventually partnering with Turkey and TKO that made me say things I've said and what. But this video for me was about giving credit to an all-time great once he hangs up the gloves. And I'll close with this. Top five, possibly very perhaps in the last 35 years, starting at 1990. I think it could be Floyd, Manny, Bernard, Roy, and him in no order. Floyd and Manny are probably going to head the top two. But I think after that, he could be number three. I think Bernard and Roy might round out that people will go, really? Bernard? That will nobody was able to accomplish some of the things Bernard did. Most title defenses, oldest champion, beat his own record a couple times as oldest champion. Other guys that come to mind in that top five, you could argue Pernell Whitaker, Alexander Usyk, Lennox Lewis, Naoya Inoue. And then beyond those guys to round out a top 10, just a few that came to mind: Oscar, Tony, Vitali, Tito, Mosley, Morales, Marquez, Barrera, and I'm sure, of course, a few other names you can go there. But point being, he's up there with the best of the best all time. Yeah. So
My final thought will be this. He said he is done with his boxing career. I believe that career ended at the post-fight press conference for Canelo. Doesn't necessarily mean he is finished with boxing or even in the ring. Let's remember what we are on the cusp of as we sit here today. Joshua Paul. This Zuffa boxing coming in, which none of us really know what the shape is going to look like. I could see a Terence Crawford over the next 2 years while other fighters build their name and potentially a genuine comeback or not. Him taking advantage of crossover boxing, of sensational moments like Joshua's about to take advantage of right now to the tune of tens of millions of dollars, of who knows what Zuffa Boxing has in store, but maybe there's some exhibition that Terence Crawford engages in. And we're about to find out the businessman that Terence Crawford is, because as he is tenacious, mean, or whatever you want to characterize his devotion and drive to in the ring, I believe that exists outside the ring, and he is a quiet powerhouse. And maybe he has the ambition to get in the boardrooms behind the scenes to drive something in boxing that doesn't require him to lace up, but maybe just pull out his pen and pick up a phone. I would be interested to see the executive that Terence Crawford may become. But there's money to be made in boxing, and maybe he's putting a period on his boxing career, which Floyd Mayweather should have done before the Conor McGregor fight, which is why Floyd Mayweather is 49-0 and not 50, and then engage in something else. I think Terence Crawford has that kind of reverence for his own legacy, his own record. He respects the sport enough and our intelligence enough to maybe not have a Conor McGregor style fight and put that onto his real boxing record. Maybe what we're seeing next in this next fight might be partially a massive money grab for exhibitions, for sensationalism, for who knows what, that he doesn't want his pristine boxing legacy to be affected by. I am not ruling that out. That will be interesting to see. I'm most interested, though, in seeing the executive that I believe Terence Crawford has the ambition to become and what that looks like. That, if I'm giving a prediction, is the next phase. Terence Crawford is about to be a kingmaker, a money and moving man behind the scenes in boxing. And it's going to be interesting to watch how he moves.